Have you ever wondered why, the moment you start seeing yourself clearly, truly clearly, your drive seems to vanish into thin air? Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you thought motivated you, everything you believed was pushing you forward, was nothing more than an elaborate performance designed to hide from the most uncomfortable truth of all, who you really are beneath all the masks you wear. This isn't just another self-help revelation or motivational crisis. This is what Carl Jung called the encounter with your shadow, and it's arguably the most disorienting psychological experience a human being can face. But here's the great question that will haunt you long after this conversation ends. What happens when the very foundations of your identity crumble and you're left staring into an abyss that stares back with your own eye? You see, most people live their entire lives driven by what Jung called the persona, that carefully crafted mask we wear to navigate the world. Your motivation, your ambitions, your relentless pursuit of success, recognition, love, or achievement, they're all powered by this false self. You wake up each day energized by the promise of becoming someone better, someone more acceptable, someone worthy of admiration. But what you don't realize is that this energy is borrowed, stolen from the parts of yourself you've banished to the darkness. The shadow isn't just your negative traits or your repressed desires, it's everything about you that doesn't fit the story you've told yourself about who you are. It's your capacity for cruelty that you've denied, your selfishness that you've rationalized away, your weakness that you've hidden behind strength, your intelligence that you've dumbed down to fit in, your power that you've given away to seem humble. The shadow contains not just your demons, but also your unrealized potential, your authentic voice, your true desires that you've sacrificed on the altar of social acceptance. For years, decades even, you've been running on the fuel of becoming successful, becoming loved, becoming respected, becoming enough. This endless journey toward an idealized version of yourself generates tremendous energy because it's powered by fear, by the terror of being seen as you truly are. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of recognition feeds the illusion that you're moving away from your shadow, that you're transcending your darker nature and ascending toward the light. But then something happens. Maybe it's a crisis, a failure, a moment of unexpected solitude, or sometimes just the accumulated weight of living a lie for too long. The performance begins to crack, and through those fissures, your authentic self starts to emerge. At first, it's terrifying. You catch glimpses of thoughts you've never allowed yourself to think, feelings you've never permitted yourself to feel, desires you've spent your life suppressing. You realize that the person you've been showing the world, the person you've even convinced yourself you are, is nothing more than a sophisticated costume. This is when the motivation dies, not because you become lazy or depressed, though it might feel that way. It dies because the engine that was driving you forward, the promise of becoming someone else, someone better, suddenly reveals itself as the very thing that was keeping you from being who you actually are. The energy you once had was the energy of escape, of running from your shadow. But now that you've turned around to face it, now that you've stopped running, that frantic energy has nowhere to go. You're left in a strange, uncomfortable stillness, wondering who you are when you're not trying to be someone else. The cruel irony is that this moment of apparent motivational death is actually the beginning of authentic life, but you can't see that yet. All you can see is the emptiness where your false motivations used to be, and it feels like you're dying inside. When the performance finally ends, when you can no longer maintain the exhausting charade of being who you think you should be, you enter what might be the most uncomfortable phase of human psychological development. The applause stops, the lights dim, and you're left alone on an empty stage with nothing but the echo of your own authentic voice, a voice you might not have heard clearly in years, perhaps decades. This isn't a breakdown, though it feels like one. This is what Jung called the necessary death that precedes rebirth, but knowing this intellectually doesn't make the experience any less disorienting. You wake up each morning and the things that used to excite you, the goals that used to pull you out of bed, the dreams that used to fuel your late nights, they all feel hollow, meaningless, like toys you've outgrown but can't quite bring yourself to throw away. Your friends and family notice the change. They ask what's wrong, offer advice, suggest you're going through a phase or dealing with depression. But you can't explain to them that you're not depressed. You're awake. You can't tell them that the problem isn't that you can't feel motivated. It's that you can finally see how artificial your previous motivations were. You're like an actor who's just realized they've been reading someone else's lines their entire life, and now the script has been taken away. The performance that's ending isn't just about career success or social status, though those are certainly part of it. It's the performance of being a good person in the way you thought you were supposed to be good. It's the performance of wanting the things you thought you were supposed to want. It's the performance of feeling the emotions you thought were acceptable to feel. Layer by layer, mask by mask, you begin to see how much of your personality was constructed to please others, to fit in, to be safe. What's particularly unsettling is realizing how much energy this performance consumed. All those years of trying to be liked, to be successful, to be right, to be strong, to be whatever you thought would earn you love and acceptance, they took tremendous effort. You were essentially living two lives, the one you showed the world and the one you hid from it. The exhaustion you feel now isn't from facing your shadow, it's from finally stopping the pretense that was draining your life force all along. But here's where it gets really interesting. As the old motivations fade, as the performance becomes impossible to maintain, you start to notice something strange in the silence. It's not the silence of emptiness, though it might feel that way at first. It's the silence of authenticity, the quiet that emerges when you stop making noise to cover up who you really are. And in this silence, something new begins to stir. Something that doesn't need to be motivated because it simply is. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. But first, you have to sit with the void, the space between who you were and who you're becoming. In this sacred void, in this space between your false self and your authentic self, something profound happens. The silence that initially felt like death begins to reveal itself as the most fertile ground you've ever encountered. But most people can't tolerate this silence. They panic at the absence of their familiar motivations and frantically try to rebuild their old persona, to restart the performance, to find new ways to run from their shadow. This is a mistake that will cost you years of your life. The void isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It's showing you what life feels like when you're not constantly trying to escape from yourself. It's giving you a taste of what Jung called the peace that passeth understanding, though peace is probably the last word you'd use to describe what you're feeling right now. The void feels sacred because it's the first honest space you've inhabited in perhaps decade. There's no audience here, no one to impress, no role to play, no story to maintain about who you are or who you're becoming. It's just you, stripped of all the strategies and stories and personas that you've used to navigate the world. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. What makes this space sacred isn't its comfort, but its truth. For the first time, maybe in your entire adult life, you're not trying to be anything other than what you are. You're not reaching for a better version of yourself, not running from a worse version, not maintaining a performance for anyone else's benefit. You're simply being, and the strangeness of this experience reveals just how long you've been living as someone else. In this void, you begin to understand why your old motivations had to die. They weren't actually yours. They were borrowed from parents, teachers, society, from everyone except the person whose life you're supposed to be living. The ambition that used to drive you was often ambition for things you didn't actually want. Powered by fears you didn't actually need to have, directed toward a version of success that wouldn't actually fulfill you. But the void isn't permanent and it's not meant to be your destination. It's a transitional space, a cocoon where something new can form. The silence here isn't the silence of emptiness, it's the silence of gestation, of something authentic taking shape in the darkness. You can't rush this process, you can't think your way through it, and you certainly can't motivate yourself out of it using your old strategy. The sacred nature of this void becomes clear when you realize that it's the first space in your life that's completely honest. There's no pretense here, no performance, no trying to be anything other than what you are. And what you are, you're discovering, is far more complex, far more interesting, and far more powerful than the simplified version of yourself you've been presenting to the world. This is where you learn to sit with discomfort without trying to fix it, to be with uncertainty without trying to resolve it, to experience emptiness without trying to fill it. These are skills you'll need for the rest of your journey, because authentic living requires a tolerance for the unknown that most people never develop. The silence you're experiencing isn't the absence of something, it's the presence of everything you've been too busy to notice. In this quiet space, beneath the chatter of your ego and the demands of your persona, your authentic self has been waiting patiently for you to stop running long enough to listen. But what it has to say might surprise you, because it doesn't speak in the language of motivation and goals and becoming someone else. The silence is sacred because it's where your real voice lives. Not the voice that tells you what you should want or who you should be, but the voice that knows what you actually want and who you actually are. This voice doesn't speak very loudly, and it doesn't speak very often because it's been shouted down by the internal chorus of everyone else's expectations for most of your life. Learning to hear this voice requires a different kind of listening than you're used to. It's not the active, goal-oriented listening of someone trying to figure out what to do next. It's the receptive, patient listening of someone who's finally willing to receive whatever truth wants to emerge. This voice doesn't motivate you in the traditional sense, because it doesn't need to convince you to be someone else. It simply reveals who you already are. What's particularly unsettling about this voice is that it often contradicts everything you thought you knew about yourself. It might tell you that you don't actually want the success you've been striving for, or that you do want things you've been denying yourself, or that you're capable of things you never imagined, or that you're afraid of things you thought you'd conquered. It speaks in paradoxes and contradictions because human beings are paradoxical and contradictory. Something your persona was never allowed to acknowledge. This is why the silence feels so foreign at first. You've spent so much time listening to external voices, to the voices of your parents, your culture, your peers, your own inner critic, that you've forgotten how to hear the quiet voice of your authentic self. It's been speaking to you all along, but you've been too busy performing to listen. As you learn to tolerate the silence, to sit with it without trying to fill it with activity or noise or familiar distractions, you begin to notice that it's not actually silent at all. It's full of information, full of wisdom, full of a kind of knowing that doesn't come from thinking, but from being. This is the knowledge of your shadow, not just its dark aspects, but its hidden gifts, its repressed potentials, its unrealized possibilities. The silence teaches you that you don't need to be motivated to be yourself. You don't need external validation to know your own worth. You don't need to achieve anything to justify your existence. These revelations are both liberating and terrifying because they strip away all the familiar handholds you've used to navigate your life. When your authentic self finally begins to speak, it doesn't sound like anything you expected. It doesn't offer you a new set of goals to chase or a better version of yourself to become. Instead, it tells you things that are simultaneously simple and revolutionary. What you actually enjoy, what actually matters to you, what you're actually afraid of, what you actually want from this life. The voice of your authentic self speaks from a place of wholeness rather than lack. It doesn't tell you what you need to fix about yourself or what you need to achieve to be worthy of love. It speaks from the assumption that you're already complete, already valuable, already enough, exactly as you are. This is a radical departure from the voice of your ego, which has spent years telling you what's wrong with you and what you need to do to make it right. What's most striking about this authentic voice is its lack of urgency. It doesn't pressure you or guilt you or try to motivate you through fear. It simply offers you information about who you are and what you want, and then trusts you to do with that information whatever feels right. This trust is perhaps the most foreign aspect of the whole experience, because you've lived your entire life driven by voices that don't trust you to make good decisions without their constant supervision. The authentic self speaks in the language of interest rather than obligation, of curiosity rather than necessity, of desire rather than duty. It tells you what draws you, what fascinates you, what you're naturally inclined toward, when you're not trying to be someone else. These inclinations might not make sense from the perspective of your old goals and ambitions, but they make perfect sense from the perspective of who you actually are. This voice also reveals aspects of your shadow that aren't dark or negative, but simply unacceptable to the persona you've been maintaining. Maybe you're more ambitious than you've allowed yourself to be, or more creative, or more sensual, or more intelligent, or more powerful. Maybe you have desires and capabilities that don't fit the humble, agreeable, non-threatening image you've cultivated. As this voice grows stronger and clearer, you begin to understand why your old motivations had to die. They were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who you are and what you want. They were trying to get you to achieve things that wouldn't actually fulfill you, to become someone you're not, to want things that aren't actually yours to want. The process of learning to trust this authentic voice is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. This is where everything changes. Though it might not look like change from the outside, the beginning of becoming isn't marked by sudden bursts of energy or clarity or motivation in the traditional sense. It's marked by a subtle but profound shift in the quality of your being. You stop trying so hard to be someone else and start allowing yourself to be who you are. The becoming that begins here isn't the becoming you're familiar with, the endless project of self-improvement and goal achievement. It's the becoming of someone who was always there, but was hidden beneath layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. It's less like building something new and more like archaeologists carefully brushing dirt away from an ancient artifact, revealing something that has always existed but was buried and forgotten. What's remarkable about this phase is how effortless it feels compared to your previous attempts at self-development. You're not forcing yourself to change or pushing yourself to grow. You're simply removing the obstacles that were preventing your authentic self from expressing itself naturally. It's like taking off clothes that were too tight, or removing a splinter that had been causing pain for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. The energy that emerges in this phase isn't the frantic, fear-based energy of your old motivations. It's a quieter but more sustainable energy that comes from alignment rather than effort, from being yourself rather than trying to be someone else. You find yourself naturally drawn towards certain activities, certain people, certain ways of being in the world, not because you should be or because they'll help you achieve some goal, but simply because they feel right. This is when you begin to understand that the shadow wasn't your enemy after all. It was the repository of all the parts of yourself that didn't fit your ego's narrow definition of who you were allowed to be. By integrating these shadow aspects, by accepting and embracing the full spectrum of who you are, you become more whole, more complete, more authentically yourself. And the beginning of becoming is also the beginning of a different relationship with time and progress. You stop measuring your worth by how much you've achieved or how far you've come or how much better you are than you used to be. Instead, you start appreciating the simple fact of your existence, the miraculous reality of being alive and conscious and capable of experience. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop growing or lose all ambition. It means your actions begin to flow from a different source. Instead of being driven by fear of not being enough, you're drawn by curiosity about what wants to emerge through you. Instead of pushing yourself toward predetermined goals, you follow your genuine interests and see where they lead. The becoming that begins here is less like climbing a mountain and more like a river finding its natural course. There's movement, there's progress, there's direction, but it's organic rather than forced, natural rather than manufactured. You're not trying to become someone else anymore. You're simply allowing yourself to unfold into who you've always been at the deepest level. This is perhaps the most paradoxical aspect of the entire journey. The moment you stop trying to become someone else, you begin to become who you actually are. The moment you stop running from your shadow, you begin to integrate the very qualities that will make you whole. The moment you stop seeking motivation from external sources, you discover the inexhaustible energy that comes from being authentically yourself. The great question we begin with, what happens when the foundations of your identity crumble, now has its answer. What happens is that you discover the foundation that was always there beneath all the false ones you constructed. What happens is that you begin to live from your center rather than your circumference, from your truth rather than your fears, from your authentic self rather than your performed self. This is why you had no motivation left after facing your shadow. The old motivations were keeping you from being who you are. They had to die so that something real could be born.